So before we get started, we'd love to share our rap song introduction video, and we hope you enjoy.
Yeah, okay, organic base, this is what you need. Take you to the future, live a life that can be disease-free. All these toxins are taxing on our bodies, no doubt. All these GMOs and these processed foods we can live without. Yeah, wanna see you live a long time. Contaminants in our water and our food supply. From the meat to the dairy and the fish, what a shame. Not realizing that my insides were inflamed. Hold up, I know it's hard to digest, that's right. I found an organic plant-based website. I even got the app, yo, this is where it's at. Promoting a healthy life, it's time to put it on the map. Assuaged, trust you don't wanna miss. It's time for you to be your best, be your healthiest. Assuaged, trust you don't wanna miss. It's time for you to be your best, be your healthiest. Hey, Assuaged, let's go.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining our student team today. We are covering lead poisoning and its effects on growth development, understanding the impacts in children and adults. Featured by the Assuaged Foundation and our students. We are grateful for our student speakers, Alyzabeth Ruffin, DeJourna P. Evans, Dr. Mahima Patil, Lilly Valladares-Macias, and the featured board members, Christal Rylowicz, our director of Practicums, myself, Cynthia Cherise Murphy, I'm the vice president. Our slide contributors, thank you for your contribution. Again, we have DeJourna Evans, Christal Rylowicz, Alyzabeth Ruffin, Christal Anderson, Dr. Mahima Patil, Maria Ayala, and Karizza Cordero. We typically have our director of media on the call, Dumnusani. He's not on this call today, but he supports our students in every way that he can. And he's on the vast majority of these calls, but not today. And he has a wonderful nonprofit foundation, Love Heals the World, and is known on those red carpets in LA, Hollywood, featuring many celebrities. He does his videographer and photographer work there. So thank you for all you do. We also want to thank Restream for supporting our student team. They provide us with this powerful multi-platform streaming capabilities, which have broadened our reach, connecting us with diverse communities across various social media platforms. Our message of public health and wellness now reaches those who need it the most. Thank you, Restream. Today, our agenda, so we'll have the introduction, overview of lead poisoning and the history, health effects, symptoms of lead poisoning. The second section, case studies and stats, examples of lead poisoning cases, statistical data on prevalence and incidence. The third section, regulation and prevention, government and public health interventions, medical interventions, long-term care strategies. And finally, in the fourth section, conclusion, summary of key points and call to action, future directions, and then we will have our student discussion.
Lead poisoning overview. Lead is a hazardous metal that can harm your health. Lead has been detected in several items, including paint, ceramics, batteries, fuel, and cosmetics. Although lead poisoning has become less common in American communities, communities, particularly those living in less affluent areas, lead poisoning is still a problem for adolescents more so than for adults. Lead can enter the respiratory system by ingesting paint chips, inhaling dust particles, and ingesting food or water contaminated with lead. Lead exposure in adolescents and adults can result in chronic illness. What is lead poisoning and sources of lead exposure? Lead poisoning occurs when a hazardous heavy metal builds up in the body over time, often months or years. Even in small doses, lead can majorly negatively affect health. Familiar sources of lead exposure: lead based paint in homes built before 1978, contaminated soil, household dust, drinking water from lead pipes in older homes, occupational exposure, toys, cosmetics, and traditional medicines, lead glazed pottery. Brief overview of historical context. 1. Ancient Rome. Lead pipes and lead acetate were used a lot, causing a widespread number of health problems. 2. Industrial Revolution. Occupational lead poisoning and the increased usage of lead became an issue. 3. 1920s. Triethyl lead is introduced and used in gasoline. 1970s to 1980s. Significant regulator actions to phase out lead gasoline and outlaw lead-based paint began. 2000s to present. Efforts to continue mitigating lead exposure continue. Health effects of lead poisoning. Impact on neurological development and behavior and cognitive effects. Exposure can damage the brain and central nervous system, causing coma, confusions, and even death. Exposure can impact brain development, leading to behavior changes and intellectual disabilities. Exposure to hippocampus, cerebellum, and prefrontal cerebral cortex in the brain can result in neurological disorder, including intellectual impairments, behavior problems, severe damage, and perhaps autism, Parkinson's, and schizophrenia. Exposure can cause immune system damage, hypertension, iron deficiency, kidney disease, and damage to the reproductive system. Lead poisoning in children. Vulnerability factors. Age. Because young children, particularly those age 6 and older, are higher risk of ingesting lead from dust, soil, or paint chips because they often explore their environment by putting objects into their mouth. Social economic status, such as low income, poverty level. Nutritional deficiencies, such as calcium, iron, and vitamin C, can increase the body lead's absorption. Home or business built before 1978 that contain lead-based paint. Living in urban areas can increase children's risk of lead poisoning due to the prevalence of lead hazards in older housing, population sources, and limited safe play areas free from lead contamination. Parental exposure to lead in workplace.
Specific developmental effects: cognitive, lower intelligent quotient IQ scores, learning disabilities, behavioral, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, aggression, conduct problems, neurological, brain damage, delayed development, physical health, growth impairment, hearing problems and anemia, verbal, delayed speech and communication disorders, emotional and social, dysregulated and unbalanced emotions. Social relationships do not exist. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention 2024. To lead in newborns may delay the development of milestones like sitting up, crawling, and walking. Infants may struggle to feed, especially if they have trouble sucking or swallowing. Exposure to lead can cause delays in speech and language development, impairing a child's capacity for efficient communication. Children can have elevated levels of hyperactivity and struggle with focus. A decreased intelligence quotient, or IQ, may arise from prolonged exposure. Lead exposure during pregnancy might result in miscarriages or premature or underweight births. Exposure to lead in adults may cause high blood pressure. Exposure to lead in adults may cause hearing and vision impairment. Children may face delays in cognitive skills and can develop pica, a desire to consume non-food items. Miller, 2015. Children may also experience health issues like abdominal pain, vomiting, constipation, reduced appetite, fatigue, hearing loss, and seizures. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC, 2024. Adults tend to have complications with elevated blood pressure, headaches, and abdominal pain. Drugs.com, 2024. Adults also tend to have reproductive problems. Children tend to have difficulties focusing, hyperactivity, and restlessness. The American Academy of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, 2023. Children also tend to have significant mood changes, anxiety, aggression, and depression. CDC, 2024. Adults tend to have difficulties with memory and concentration. Adults also tend to have significant mood changes and high blood pressure. Mayo Clinic Staff, 2022.
The diagnostic methods. First is the testing for lead levels. Blood level test measures the lead concentration in the blood via a finger prick or venous blood samples. Medical imaging, which is X-ray, helps identifying objects like lead but are insufficient for diagnosis. Laboratory tests such as inductively coupled plasma mass and graphite furnace atomic absorption spectroscopy. The challenges in diagnosis. Lead poisoning symptoms are nonspecific and can mimic other disorders. Early detection is difficult due to symptoms not showing until the lead levels are dangerous. Even if someone is cognitively impaired, there is no known safe threshold for the blood lead level. Assessing the severity of the lead poisoning through blood tests is challenging because they measure the blood lead level, other blood markers, and a complete blood cell count. The case studies and statistics. So the first case study is the Flint water crisis, which was from year 2014 to 2019. The location was Flint, Michigan, USA. The overview is, in this case involved the contamination of the city's drinking water supply with lead after a source was switched to the Flint River in 2014. The river caused lead from aging pipes to leach into the water supply, exposing thousands of residents, especially children, to dangerously high lead levels. The second case study was the lead poisoning in paint industry workers, which is still ongoing. The location is in various countries. So what happens here is the workers in the paint manufacturing and paint industries can be exposed to the lead by inhaling lead dust or fumes or ingesting the lead contaminated food or beverages. Prevalence and incidence. The World Health Organization estimates that the lead exposure contributes to 0.6% of the global disease burden, with the highest burden in developing regions. According to the WHO, approximately 1 in 3 children globally have blood lead level higher than the safe level, which is 5 micrograms per deciliter. In United States, the CDC tracks blood lead level in children through the National Health and Nutritional Examination Survey. The data shows that the declining trend in childhood lead poisoning due to the regulatory efforts and lead hazard control programs. And policies. The governmental regulations. The first is Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Shipyards, constructions, and general industry workers have lead standards that only allow exposure to 50 microorganisms of lead per cubic meter or air over an 8-hour work period. Food and Drug Administration, which is FDA, limits the lead exposure, especially in young children, recommends a maximum level of 100 ppb in candy, 10 ppb of lead in apple juice. Public health intervention. The CDC lead poisoning prevention program supports the state and local programs to improve blood lead screening. Lead poisoning in adults. The occupational exposure according to the CDC. It is important to note that the adults who are exposed to lead poisoning can bring it home to their families. Some occupations that have high lead exposure includes plumbers, construction workers, battery manufacturers, automotive industry workers, shooting range workers, smelting and refining factory workers, manufacturing workers. Health effects of reproductive health according to CDC. In males, you tend to see reduced sperm count, abnormal sperm, hormonal change, and infertility. In females, there is menstrual irregularities, hormonal disruptions, infertility, and adverse pregnancy outcomes. Now coming to the treatment and management. Medical intervention. Adults who have had mildly high lead levels often recover without any problems. In children, even mild lead poisoning can have a permanent impact on their attention and IQ. Treatment. The first is the chelation therapy. In this treatment, a medication is given by mouth which binds to the lead so that it is excreted in urine. Second is the ethylene diamine tetraacetic acid, which is also known as the EDTA, chelation therapy. Healthcare workers treat adults with lead levels greater than 45 microgram deciliters of blood and children who cannot tolerate the drug used in conventional chelation therapy. Most commonly, this is given with a chemical called this calcium sodium EDTA. EDTA is given by injection. The second part would be the supportive care. The first part of that is the nutritional support. Certain food can protect against lead poisoning, such as vitamin C, calcium, iron. They all block the lead from being absorbed in the body, and it helps in elimination. The second is hydration, encouraging fluid intake to help eliminate lead through urine. Now, with the long-term care strategies, it often overlaps with the prevention strategies. These steps include, first is regular monitoring, which includes blood lead level testing and health assessment. Second is the developmental support, which includes cognitive and behavioral therapy and educational support. Third is the nutritional intervention, which includes balanced diet and supplementation. Fourth is the environmental management, which includes lead-safe housing and safe renovation practices. And last would be the access to healthcare, which would be medical follow-up, integrated care.
So, Lilly, we're ready for you. We are on slide 19 on the prevention strategies. So I'm thinking, Lilly, are you having some... I cannot hear you, my dear. Perhaps there's some technical difficulties happening on Lily's end, and no worries. Dr. Mahima, if you wanted to continue, you're more than welcome to.
Okay, the next slide is the prevention strategies. First is the environmental control measures. Preventive measures against the lead poisoning are essential to protect public health. Lead poisoning can have detrimental effects on overall health, cognitive development, and well being. Preventing lead poisoning through environmental control measures is very important because although it is difficult to identify, it is preventable. Preventing lead poisoning requires consistent treatment and testing of water sources to prevent lead poisoning. Community and household intervention. Community and household intervention are crucial for addressing lead poisoning risk. Advocating removal of lead-based paint from homes, emphasizing maintenance, testing water and soil quality, controlling dust, enforcing hygiene, spreading awareness, educating on prevention, urging testing for children, and promoting hand washing are vital steps to mitigate exposure and raise awareness.
Awesome. Thank you. We're going to try Lilly again on the next slide. She re-entered the room. Thank you, Dr. Mahima.
Thank you. Are you guys able to hear me now?
Woohoo!
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Public awareness campaigns. There's educational initiatives and advocacy efforts. Educational initiatives. School programs. Integrating lead poisoning education into school curricula. Community workshops. Conduct workshops to educate parents and caregivers about preventing lead poisoning. Advocacy efforts. Collaboration with non-governmental organizations to amplify outreach and resources. Media campaigns. Utilizing social media, radio, and TV to raise awareness about the dangers of lead poisoning and prevention methods. Policy advocacy. Working with policymakers to strengthen regulations and funding for lead poisoning prevention and treatment programs. Example campaigns. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Childhood Lead Poisoning Prevention Program. Senator Ben Cardin, the chair of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, introduced the resolution on April 18, 2024, after proposing a Senate resolution in October 2023 to increase awareness of the problem. Impact on socioeconomic status. Economic burden of lead poisoning. There's healthcare costs for treatment of lead poisoning exposure, educational costs. Children who are exposed to lead poisoning may experience learning disabilities, which could cause an increase in educational costs. Repairing costs. Lead poisoning usually comes from painted walls in schools and communities, which may need renovation and add additional costs. Social service costs. When exposed to lead poisoning, families may need services to learn about health, nutrition, and care to move forward from exposure. The social implications. Lead poisoning has significant social implications, primarily because it disproportionately affects marginalized and low-income communities. Lead exposure usually occurs in older houses that have not had maintenance. Usually the people living in these homes don't have the funds to renovate, so they are exposed to the toxins of lead poisoning. Usually children in these households are more likely to develop developmental delays, behavior issues, and learning disabilities. When communities suffer from these circumstances without public health authority support, they may feel hopeless and lose trust in governmental authorities. Global perspectives. Lead poisoning issues worldwide. Lead poisoning remains a global health concern affecting millions, particularly in developing countries where exposure is worse by industrial pollution, leaded paints, and inadequate water sanitation. Lead poisoning tends to be more severe in developing countries due to several factors, such as lack of regulation, informal economy, lead-contaminated materials don't have safe handling regulations, older buildings also often contain lead-based paint, limited healthcare, and poverty, with the lack of resources to address contamination. International efforts and collaborations. Enforcing international standards for lead exposure ensures industries and products adhere to safe practices, harmonizing regulations globally. Sharing best practices and technologies for lead remediation supports developing countries in cleaning up contaminated environments. In contrast, technical and financial support strengthens their capacity to monitor, test, and treat lead poisoning cases, fostering international partnerships for knowledge exchange and innovative solutions. By working together, countries can better protect vulnerable populations, improve public health outcomes, and create safer environments for future generations.
Future directions, research and innovation. Lead detection technologies, including portable devices, swiftly identify lead in environmental samples. Remediation techniques like soil washing aim to remove lead contamination. Lead-free materials prevent leaching into the water and the environment. Public health interventions educate on lead risks. Governments enforce stricter standards on lead in products and emissions to safeguard public health and the environment. Policy recommendations. To prevent lead poisoning, regulations must be enforced to eliminate lead from paints, plumbing, and other consumer products. Public education campaigns should raise awareness about the risks of lead exposure and promote safe practices. Regular screening and testing programs should be mandated for children and high-risk populations, with accessible resources for lead hazard remediation in homes and environments. Collective efforts between government agencies, healthcare providers, and community organizations are essential to ensure effective implementation and enforcement of the lead poisoning prevention measures. And our conclusion, the summary of the key points. Lead poisoning significantly impacts health, particularly in children, affecting cognitive development and behavior. Familiar sources include old paint, contaminated soil, and plumbing. Awareness and education are crucial for prevention, as even low lead levels can have severe long-term effects. The call to action for addressing lead poisoning. Communities must prioritize lead testing in homes and schools, advocate for safer housing policies, and provide resources for families. Everyone can contribute by spreading awareness, participating in cleanup initiatives, and supporting legislation to reduce lead exposure to protect future generations.
Thank you so much to our student team and our executive director of Practicums, Christal. You guys prepared a wonderful presentation here. So now we're moving into the question portion, time for our student discussion. First question. What surprising facts have you learned about lead poisoning and its impact on health? Lead poisoning can cause long term developmental issues, including cognitive impairments and behavioral problems in children. Surprisingly, even low levels of lead exposure can significantly affect intelligence, quotient IQ, and academic performance. Additionally, lead can remain in the body for years, making early detection and prevention crucial for protecting health and development. The second question: how do you think lead exposure affects a child's development differently than adults? What are some everyday sources of lead that people might not be aware of? Lead exposure in children can lead to severe developmental delays and learning disabilities, while adults may experience more physical health issues. Everyday sources include old paint, contaminated soil, plumbing pipes, and some imported toys or jewelry that may contain lead. So now we're going to go ahead and move. We can welcome our students to turn on their cameras, and we're going to move into the discussion part here. And DeJourna, would you like to add some input here? Oh, you're on mute. There you are.
Yes. I found this PowerPoint very interesting regarding the lead poisoning. When doing my research, I seen that it was like 70 million people that were affected with lead. I kind of remember when the lead exposure first came out. I think I was like in elementary school. With the resources that they have now and the things that they're doing to try to prevent it, I think that it's going well, but I do think that it needs to be a little bit more done in order to help and to implement different strategies so lead poison won't continue to increase.
Thank you. I completely agree with you. Dr. Mahima?
Hi. So I think what's interesting is how even a minute, um, microgram per deciliter, which we can't even imagine like normally, has so much effect on your brain, especially.
Yeah.
So I just feel it's very important that we keep an eye out for kids with pica, which is usually just a mental health. It's a mental problem, and also kids with anemia because they are the one who pick up on these pica symptoms. And also, just like mentioned in the slides, I think regular checkup
Yeah.
really benefit everyone because we never know what we're exposed to. And also, since lead stays in our body for a longest time, it is detrimental, and also it doesn't break down that easily in environment. So we need to be very careful, where we are, especially people who live around industries. They tend to be exposed to lead more. So I think lead poisoning is definitely something we need to keep an eye out because it's a slow poison. Like we don't really see it till it actually happens.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Uh, Elizabeth, did you have any input?
I thought it was interesting how how many different sources you can get lead poisoning from.
Mm-hmm.
But regular checkups, I also agree, would help with especially younger children because they tend to eat and put everything in their mouth.
Exactly.
Thank you so much. And Christal, I can't see your camera, but I see you on the. No, I'm not sure. Is that on my end, or can we not see Christal? No. Yeah, you're blacked out, but I'm sure we can hear you. Did you want to add some feedback?
Yes, it is showing on my end that I am present in the presentation, but the one thing that particularly lead is even in our water, and so you
Mhm.
cannot fully escape it. Even if you live in a brand new home, it is going to be there. One of the things that really made me mad was like in little matchbox cars, the lead paint. And unfortunately, if you live in an old building or an old house, you're going to be exposed to lead either way. But I did want to bring to your attention that pregnant women, when they get connected with WIC services, you're tested for lead. And after you have the baby, every so often they do test for lead poisoning. So that is a very good thing, to be tested and try to be aware of your surroundings, especially for our children that are defenseless, that can't, do anything to protect themselves from that lead poisoning.
Thank you so much, Christal. And last but not least, Lily, what would you like to say, my dear? I think you might. Are you on mute? Oh, she's like, one moment though. So we've been having technical issues all day. And that's what makes I love that about our presentations is there's no holding back from the authentic nature of that happening. So Lily, if you want to type in something, I'm happy to read it off. But we can move on to the second. Yeah. Oh, okay. So we'll move on to the second portion of the question. Question number 3: what key messages would you include if you could create a public awareness campaign about lead poisoning? How can communities work together to address and prevent lead poisoning in their neighborhoods? Key messages for a public awareness campaign should include the dangers of lead exposure, its sources, and the importance of testing homes and children. Communities can collaborate by organizing cleanup initiatives, providing educational resources, advocating for safer housing policies, and encouraging regular health screenings to prevent lead poisoning. Fourth question: in what ways can schools help raise awareness about lead poisoning among students and parents? What are the long term effects of lead poisoning on cognitive development and behavior in children? Schools can raise awareness by incorporating lead poisoning education into the curriculum, hosting workshops for parents, and distributing informational materials. Long term effects on lead poisoning in children include reduced IQ, learning disabilities, behavioral issues, and increased risk of attention problems, significantly impacting their academic and social development. Okay, so we have reached the end of our discussion, and we're on these last two questions. And the input that I would provide, I know lead is in so many different things, especially in processed foods. I have seen just lawsuits come up with the baby foods. We didn't just have a baby. She's a year old this next week, and we don't buy any of the canned or the glass bottled pureed foods. We make our own at home. We use organics, and she might get mango and pear and squash one day, and then the next day sweet potato and peas, whatever we could, do ourselves at home and avoid the risk of, mercury, lead, and other contaminants. These are our children. They're our future generations. There's what's going to keep us, going on and thriving. And so, tending to our children, I think, is very important. And it's a little bit mind blowing sometimes because I know us as adults, we're the ones that take care of the children, and so it just seems like even in emergency rooms, at least what I experienced, they definitely prioritize the adults before the children. And again, I understand adults, we need to be here to tend for our children, but our children should be, thriving and healthy and not exposed to these kind of chemicals. And some adults should be, I saw a lot of coverage, about paint. And one thing I had witnessed last year, we had our home painted, and some of the lacquer that put over it, the people that came to paint were actually making contact with the paint with their bare hands. And it blew my mind because we could barely breathe inside of the house. It was so potent. And then just to see someone using their own, making skin contact with those kind of contaminants, and what the health implications could be. So that's what I would like to add to this very insightful conversation. Thank you so much. And DeJourna, I hope I know I'm not pronouncing your name. Can you help me? And what would you like to add, my dear?
Based off the last question, as far as the educational purpose goes, I feel like that we do need to be well aware on the things that we're in contact with when it comes to lead poisoning. And if we are moving into a new house, making sure that the paint in the house is of code, or making sure that the things that we're eating doesn't have lead in it. And I feel that once we become more aware and familiar, we'll be more aware of the situation and better and living better and healthier lives.
Thank you so much for providing that insight, and so true. Dr. Mahima, would you like to add something, my dear?
Yeah, I think I agree with what Cynthia and DeJourna said, because education is super important. If your community is aware about what exactly is lead poisoning and how it is spread, it can help overall as a community with better housing. And I think if the teachers are aware, then they can actually pay better attention to their students and make out if they have learning disability or if they see anything different in the child, and then inform the parents, and that can indirectly actually help everyone. And my second a point is actually what Cynthia had told about how the canned food has lead and all of that. I don't know if many people know, but then even these imported spices and goods that we get from different countries actually have lead content in them. Example, we tend to get turmeric and spices from India, and just to get the weight high for the exporting, what they do is they end up adding zinc and lead in it instead of actually adding the pure spices. And that actually, there's a research on it, how it affects negatively our health. So again, everything narrows down again to the education. So I think as community, we need to be well informed about this to combat it.
I agree. And, when you just said that about the spices and stuff, I remember, because we don't shop at Trader Joe's, but I remember Trader Joe's had some products that they had pulled, including, I think, turmeric spice. And so, like in India, other countries, they have this machinery, and the machinery will, eject particles into food substances. So, it is really scary, and that's why, just, looking at news outlets, doing your research, paying for organics, it's a little bit more expensive, but at the end of the day, what is your health worth? You're gonna have all these medical bills, and
Right.
these concerns around these substances that, it's out of our control. That's the only thing that's within our control, is to, just be aware of what's happening. Elizabeth, thank you, Dr. Mahima. Elizabeth, did you want to add anything, my dear?
Sure. Um, I also agree with the education statement because I feel like if people were more educated about the areas that they live in, then less people would get lead poisoning, including adults, like the elderly.
Yeah, I agree. Our elderly too, they're susceptible. Children are elderly. It's like we are the number one nation with the amount of chronic disease. I mean, there's ingredients and substances in our food chain supply that's not even, it's prohibited in other countries like UK, Europe, I want to say Australia. But Christal, I know you have something. I can't see you. You're on a blackout screen, but I know you're there.
Yes, I am. You said the best for last. Um, I will give my age away. I turned 45 last week. And the reason I bring that to the table is I remember in the 80s when I started school, kindergarten in 1984, the public health department would bring us coloring books with information on lead, and they had activities, and then they would leave brochures that we were supposed to take home to our parents. And I don't know if schools still do that, but that would definitely be one way of giving education in schools, because a lot of parents are unaware of this stuff. And, depending on how old their parents are, or for example their grandparents, they may not know about lead because it's not talked about, like COVID-19 or chickenpox or all of this other stuff. And so it would be lovely to see that integrative education with those activities for young children, and be able to take them home to their parents, That way the kids can say, hey, mom, this is what I learned in, activities today at school. And they could share their coloring book and the parents could read up on it. Because again, in our previous question, when I mentioned WIC, not all pregnant women are eligible for WIC. And so if you're not eligible for WIC, your doctor's office, even though they should test you for lead poisoning, they don't always, because you have some women who have no health insurance and they can't afford it. And so it really boils down to, we need to educate it as much as possible, so that we can help each other and stop this from becoming such a larger problem in terms of cognitive disabilities for our young children, which, then when they get to be adults and they lead into the elderly, I'm kind of scared who's going to take care of them, because they can't necessarily take care of themselves. So I push for, education and advocacy. Even if you make a simple movie about simple things to display to adults, that would help out a lot. So thank you.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And one thing I noticed on this presentation, unless I kind of missed it, is fish. Our fish in our oceans, they have high levels of mercury and lead and arsenic. And I have to tell you, before we went vegan, and sometimes I've fallen off the wagon because I love fish. I love salmon. And I used to love shrimp. I swear the last time I had shrimp, my whole throat swelled up, and I just haven't touched it since. And I just feel like some of our foods that we love, it's really inevitable to get around those toxins, whether it's wildlife fish that they, wild caught, or, because they have like oil rigs in the water, and sometimes there's oil explosions. And so you're getting all those contaminants. There's actually a movie called Deep Water with Mark Wahlberg that covers, it's a true story, that covers, much of what happens in the oceans. And it's scary. We just have to be very aware of what we're consuming. And it's kind of inevitable being in a polluted environment. But this nevertheless was such a insightful conversation. Thank you guys for contributing and being here today. And does anyone else have any concluding remarks before we hop off? Big smiles. No, because you guys you got so nerdy and brainy with all this information, and I know everybody who's watching on this presentation will love it. So, all right, you guys. Well, thank you for being here. That will conclude our PowerPoint on lead poisoning and its effects on growth development today. Go ahead and give us a follow at Assuaged app